Sometimes the most dangerous decisions do not look reckless in the moment. They look responsible, they look productive, they look like answering one more message, fixing one more thing, saying yes one more time, staying up one more hour, making one more decision because you do not want anything to fall apart. But here's the problem. When your body is exhausted, your mind is overloaded, and your spirit has not had room to breathe, urgency can start sounding like wisdom. And that is where hustle gets dangerous. Not because work is bad, not because ambition is wrong, not because discipline does not matter, but because depletion will make fear sound responsible. Hey, tribe. Welcome to another episode of the Becoming Her podcast. This is your host, Faye Jones, and today we're talking about when urgency starts sounding like wisdom. This conversation matters because a lot of women are not lazy. They are not careless. They are not unserious. They are carrying a lot. They are building businesses, managing families, showing up for clients, making decisions, handling money, answering messages, thinking through content, trying to obey God, trying to be wise, trying to be responsible. And somewhere in all of that, their judgment starts getting tired. And when your judgment gets tired, you do not always notice it right away. You just start reacting faster. You start second guessing more. You start copying what other people are doing because it feels easier than slowing down to hear God. You start calling pressure strategy. You start calling panic obedience. You start calling exhaustion discipline. And little by little, hustle starts hijacking your judgment. Let's make this plain. Hustle culture does not just make you tired. It changes how you choose. Your brain, your body, and your spirit were not designed to run on constant pressure with no recovery. You can only make so many good decisions in a day before your capacity starts dropping. And I know people do not like hearing that because we have been trained to believe that limits are weakness. But limits are not weakness. Limits are part of design. Even Jesus rested. Even Jesus withdrew. Even Jesus did not let the demands of the crowd become the voice of the Father. So why do we think we can ignore our limits and still hear clearly? That is the question. Because when you are depleted, you reach for shortcuts. You say yes because saying no would require emotional energy. You buy the thing because researching it properly feels like too much. You send the message because sitting with your feelings feels uncomfortable. You change the offer because one person did not respond. You rewrite your whole brand identity at night because your tired brain convinced you that everything is broken. You make decisions from a body that is asking for rest, then you try to spiritualize the outcome. And this is where we need to be honest. Not every urgent feeling is discernment. Sometimes urgency is your nervous system trying to escape discomfort. Sometimes urgency is fear trying to regain control. Sometimes urgency is pride refusing to admit you need rest. Sometimes urgency is the algorithm discipling your pace more than the Holy Spirit is discipling your soul. That is not wisdom. That is pressure. And pressure is not a reliable shepherd. Now, let me say this carefully. There are urgent moments in life. There are real deadlines. There are emergencies. There are seasons where you have to move quickly, make decisions, and handle what is in front of you. We are not talking about pretending life never requires urgency. We are talking about letting urgency become your operating system. There is a difference. It is one thing to respond to a real need. It is another thing to live in a constant state of pressure and then call that spiritual maturity. That is where people get stuck. They think because they are busy, they are being faithful. They think because they are moving fast, they are being obedient. They think because they are tired, they must be working hard enough. But tired does not always mean faithful. Sometimes tired means you have been carrying what God never asked you to carry. Sometimes tired means you have been making decisions from fear instead of peace. Sometimes tired means you have built a rhythm that does not leave room for wisdom. And if you are not careful, hustle will train you to worship speed. Move faster, answer faster, post faster, launch faster, decide faster, recover never. That is not kingdom order. God is not frantic. The Holy Spirit does not drive you like a slave master. He leads, He prompts, He convicts, He restores, He gives wisdom. There's a difference between conviction and panic. There is a difference between obedience and pressure. There is a difference between being led and being chased. And if you never slow down long enough to tell the difference, you will start obeying whatever feels loudest. That is dangerous because fear can get loud, comparison can get loud, bills can get loud, the algorithm can get loud, other people's opinions can get loud. But loud does not mean Lord. Let that sink in. Loud does not mean Lord. Just because something is screaming for your attention does not mean it deserves your obedience. This is why your judgment is part of your stewardship. We talk a lot about stewarding money, time, gifts, business, influence, and resources. But your judgment has to be stewarded too. Because if your judgment gets sloppy, everything attached to it feels the impact. Your money feels it. Your business feels it. Your relationships feel it. Your body feels it. Your spiritual life feels it. Your decisions do not stay isolated. They create fruit. So when hustle starts weakening your ability to discern clearly, that is not a small thing. That is a stewardship issue. Now let's bring this into real life. You know those nights when you are tired, overstimulated, and emotionally thin, and suddenly everything feels urgent? The email feels urgent. The post feels urgent. The decision feels urgent. The conversation feels urgent. The purchase feels urgent. The rebrand feels urgent. The need to fix your entire life feels urgent. But if you ate something, took a shower, turned off the phone, went to sleep, and came back to it in the morning, half of that urgency would lose its power. Why? Because some of what we call clarity is just adrenaline. Some of what we call conviction is just anxiety. Some of what we call strategy is just a tired mind trying to feel safe. That is not an insult. That is being human. You are a whole person. You are not a floating spirit making decisions in a vacuum. Your sleep matters. Your stress matters. Your recovery matters. Your food matters. Your emotions matter. Your workload matters. Your digital environment matters. Your body participates in your judgment. That does not make your body Lord. It makes your body something you are responsible to steward. And this is where spiritual maturity has to get practical. Because sometimes we want God to give us wisdom while we are actively living in ways that make wisdom harder to hear. We keep the phone open all day. We let every notification interrupt us. We answer messages when our mind is already tired. We make financial decisions when we are emotionally activated. We have heavy conversations when we are hungry, exhausted, and resentful. We scroll for answers instead of sitting quietly with God. Then we wonder why we feel foggy, reactive, and spiritually off-center. Here's the difference. Wisdom is not just about having the right information. Wisdom also requires the right posture. A depleted woman can have access to the right information and still mishandle it because she is not in a posture to process it well. That is why rest is not just physical. Rest protects clarity. Rest protects discernment. Rest protects obedience. Rest protects your ability to choose from peace instead of panic. This is part of the larger conversation I unpack in my book, Righteousness in the Marketplace. It is for women who are trying to build, work, lead, create, and obey God without losing their integrity or letting success cost their soul. I talk about hustle culture, performance pressure, manipulation, identity, and what it means to build something God can actually bless. It is available in print and ebook wherever books are sold, and you can learn more at fayejoneslive.com/rim. Now, coming back to this episode, I want you to see why this matters so much. Because if success requires you to constantly live in depletion, then something about the structure needs to be examined. I am not saying there will never be hard seasons. There will be. I am not saying obedience will always feel easy. It will not. I am not saying you will never have to stretch. You will. But there is a difference between being stretched by obedience and being drained by bondage. One produces maturity. The other produces collapse. One deepens your dependence on God. The other makes you feel like everything depends on you. And that is where hustle becomes a false god. Because hustle does not just ask for effort. It asks for trust. It asks you to believe that if you just keep pushing, clarity will eventually come. But many times clarity does not come from more pushing. Clarity returns when capacity is protected. You cannot keep exhausting your body and expect your judgment to stay sharp. You cannot keep overloading your mind and expect your discernment to stay clean. You cannot keep ignoring your limits and expect your spirit to remain sensitive. At some point, wisdom requires you to stop, not quit, not abandon the assignment, not become passive. Stop letting pressure make every decision. That is a different kind of discipline. Anybody can keep running until they crash. It takes maturity to recognize when your pace is no longer producing fruit, it is producing fog. It takes humility to say, I am not making this decision tonight. It takes wisdom to say, this conversation needs to wait. It takes self-awareness to say, I am not clear right now. I am tired, and tired is not the same thing as led. That one sentence could save you from so much unnecessary chaos. Tired is not the same thing as led. So here's a practical boundary I want you to consider. Pick a daily decision cutoff time, not a time when you stop existing, not a time when you pretend life is neat and perfect, a time when you stop making major decisions. After that time, no pricing decisions, no emotionally loaded conversations, no deciding your whole business is broken, no buying programs because you feel behind, no rewriting your whole content strategy because one post did not perform, no scrolling for answers when what you really need is silence, no sending the text that is coming from exhaustion instead of wisdom, no giving people access to your judgment when your judgment is tired. That is not laziness, that is stewardship. You are protecting tomorrow's clarity. And let me make this even more practical. If something still matters in the morning, you can deal with it then. If it was truly wisdom, it will still be wisdom after rest. But if it only had power when you were tired, anxious, hungry, overstimulated, and afraid, then you need to question what was really driving it. Because wisdom does not need you to be frantic in order to obey. God is not depending on your exhaustion. He is not asking you to prove your commitment by destroying your capacity. He is not glorified by a version of you that is productive but spiritually numb. There is a kind of building that looks impressive from the outside but is quietly eating the person doing the building. That is not righteousness. That is not peace. That is not stewardship. And we have to stop dressing that up as discipline. Discipline should help you obey God with more clarity, not make you so depleted that fear starts making decisions on your behalf. This is where I want you to examine yourself. Where have you been calling urgency wisdom? Where have you been making decisions from depletion and then blaming the results on confusion? Where have you been trusting pressure more than peace? Where have you been afraid to slow down because you think everything will fall apart if you stop carrying it? And maybe the deeper question is this: who taught you that rest means you are not serious? Because that belief is doing damage. Rest does not mean you are unserious. Rest means you understand that your capacity is not infinite. Rest means you are not God. Rest means you are willing to live inside the limits He designed instead of trying to prove you can outrun them. That is humility. And humility protects wisdom. So, as we close, I want you to remember this. Urgency is not always wisdom. Pressure is not always obedience. Speed is not always strategy. Exhaustion is not proof that you are faithful. And depletion is not a safe place to make decisions that affect your future. Your judgment is part of your stewardship. Protect it. Let God teach you the difference between being led and being chased. Let Him show you where hustle has been hijacking your discernment. Let Him restore a rhythm that allows your mind, body, and spirit to come back into order. Because the goal is not just to build. The goal is to build with clean hands, clear judgment, and a soul that is still able to hear God. We've reached the end of today's episode, but the growing can continue. You can listen on my website, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or Spotify. Make sure you follow or subscribe so you do not miss future episodes. And if this podcast has been helping you think more clearly, grow more deeply, and recognize patterns you could not name before, take a moment to leave a review. Reviews help the podcast grow, become more discoverable, and reach the women who need this kind of teaching. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you in the next episode.